Welcome to another episode of Fair Folk at Work. Today, my guest, he's done something at Fair that I thought was impossible to do, but he has convinced me that he has a point. Randall Scott, thank you for Fair Folk at Work attending.
Thanks for inviting me. Happy to be here.
But before we get to that, I hope, intriguing introduction, I have to ask the traditional Fair Folk at Work question, which is, who was the person to say to you, there's this thing called Faire, and what did they say to get you out there?
Funny you ask. I was 10 or 11 and parents were divorced. It was weekend with dad. And he said, "Hey, do you guys want to go to a fair this weekend?" I thought, okay, well, that's like a county fair. That was all I knew. And I said, sure, that'd be fine, whatever. And we came out to the Renaissance Pleasure Fair in Southern California in the late 70s. I was blown away by the color and the pageantry and the actors and the performers and the entire thing. I was like this the whole time. I was stunned. I can so clearly still remember that day and what that felt like. And for good or for ill, that changed the course of my life. Now I make a living at Renaissance festivals around the country, as well as film and music video and stage projects. But Faire is part of my soul. It sounds strange to say that.
Did you immediately say, I want to do this? Or did that I could do this realization come later?
I wanted to go back be a part of it. I don't know that I thought of it in terms of production. I just wanted to be a part of that environment. Now, again, I was only 10 or 11. So I went for a number of years. And then through high school, my friends and I would put our own costumes together and we would go for years. And it wasn't until I started working doing Horse Tourney with Kevin Patterson, actually, in I think 88 or 89, that I really got involved in the whole production, the performance, the actor part of it. But again, I had been going every year, season passes from the time I was 14 or 15, and then eventually kicked over to the performance part of it.
This is a weird question, but did you live in the Valley?
I did not. I was raised in Long Beach and then Orange County.
So you were from the 405 contingent going up.
Yeah, it was the 405 to the 110 to the 101 to Cheesebro exit or something like that. You're bringing back memories, boy.
That's the goal. As you're wandering around Fair with your Forever Pass, what made the Horse Tourney be the draw that got you employed there?
At 11 or 12, I don't know I guess some people do have career aspirations. I don't know that I did. But as I went through high school, I realized at some point that I was an actor, I was a performer. That's where I wanted to go. And in 88 or 89, I started working at Medieval Times in Buena Park as a knight performing in the show, the Joust show. And there was a gentleman there named Greg Hopla who said, once he found out I had been doing Faire year after year, he said, "Hey, you ought to go ride and work the festival." And so that kind of opened that door, and I learned a little more about it. Went up to Fair site, auditioned, got in. I was one of the few male riders, apparently. At that time, it was harder to find men who could ride. You're talking late 80s. And that kind of opened the door. And it so happened that I believe that Kevin was one of the instrumental people in starting St. Anne's Guild, the Horse Tourney. But I was there riding, competing, escorting the joust. Later on, I took part in the joust show as like fighting squires. But yeah, it was through that medieval.
I have a
Yeah,
question. What did your audition for the Horse Tourney consist of?
mostly it was just riding horse. If I could ride, that was what they were. I don't recall if there were any sort of lines. I think it was just talking to people, who were there, the women that were in charge, riding with them, working with them to do maybe a couple of simple riding patterns. And that was it.
Did you have to bring your own horse?
Good question. I'm trying to remember. I don't believe so. No, if memory serves. However, once I got in, I did bring my own horse. It belonged to a friend of mine who let me use the horse for the run of Faire that I ridden on and off various times. So during my time riding, yes, I was riding my own horse. I think I just rode whatever horse they had for the audition.
Do you remember the names of any of the ladies who auditioned you?
Joanne Asman was in charge of Horse Tourney at the time. There was another woman that was like her right hand woman who I can see clearly, but I don't recall her name. She was a real cowboy. But they were in charge at the time. And I think Joanne was in charge for a while and then she moved on.
Do you remember what they told you they were doing out at the Renaissance Fair doing a horse tournament?
Yeah, I mean, it all made perfect sense. We had the joust show, it was Kelly Bailey's show. And the people in Horse Tourney, much like the other guilds would do their guild activity, Horse Tourney was to escort the knights in and out, be color and pageantry for the joust show. Outside of that, there was a series of games and competitions that we would all compete in as a show for the audience. And then we also did things like the morning gate. We'd ride up delivering a message from the Queen with the Earl of Leicester. There would be a midday Queen show. We would ride up as well. And then, of course, closing the gate.
What was the high point of your day when you started at the Renaissance Fair?
That's a tough question. I think it was just being there and being part of it after attending for so many years as a guest to finally step into a performance role with a certain skill set, be there for the opening gate, to be there for the day show, to do all the stuff that we did. I was part of this. I was getting paid to do it. Not much, mind you. The honoraria we got was absolutely minimal, as I'm sure you recall. I made my way to like $25 a day by the time I was done. And of course, at the time, I was young and enthusiastic. And I was also getting a lot of training, not so much the horse riding. I already knew that. I got some real training at medieval times, but was getting a lot of improv training, performance training. I was trying things, I was doing things, I was pissing people off, I was giving people a good time. It was a really good training ground. And I look back at that fondly. So I think really just being there as part of the production was really the big thing that really excited me. And
I have a technical question. Since part of
sure.
being in the show is interacting with patrons and you're up on a horse, when you talk to
Mhm.
people, did you hop off the horse, especially if it was a child? So you're not like the looming giant?
It's not as great a distance as it would seem. We could literally ride right up to the rail, and people could be standing at the rail talking to you, and they could pet the horse, and you could reach out and shake their hand. Little kids would be there. They could reach out and touch the shoulder of the horse, or their parents would pick them up, that sort of thing.
So you never talked to a
So that
person on the street on the horse?
I will tell you something that I found incredibly amusing. There were times being on horseback, imagine this guy with, this long hair on a horse riding around, rearing up in these fancy horse maneuvers. There would be women that would be looking at you, and you could just see by the look in their eye that they were fantasizing. And they had this look when they looked at you. And I recall one time as we were exiting the arena when this happened, I sort of stopped. I was in the very back of the whole group of us riding out, and I wheeled the horse around and looked at her and then wheeled on back around. It was a real flashy end move. About an hour or two later, while I was walking through the fair to get lunch, I happened to see her. And as I'm walking up to her, she turned and she looked at me, blank look on her face, continued on her way, had no idea I was the same person. When people in the audience and they have this fantasy in their head, it's not you, the individual they're looking at, it's the fantasy they see. And unless for some reason you really strike a chord with them, when they see you later, they don't even realize it's the same person. It's kind of like when you see fair people outside their costume. It takes you a moment to recognize who they are if it's not someone you don't already know. I'll tell you, that deflated my ego pretty quick, and you realize that it's the illusion and the fantasy that they see, not you.
Did you find that children liked meeting the knight? And could you say, God you good den, princess, and they would just eat it up?
Yeah, they did then and they do now. You're this huge, consequential person with such gravitas, and yet you're talking to them, and they're the only thing in the universe, and that really makes an impact on them.
This is kind of a segue into what I talked about at the introduction, because you talk about your show where you invite the audience to heckle you, and at the same time, you create a bond with them. So, what was the idea behind having a show where people heckle you as you fight? And I'll first of all describe your show for those who perhaps have forgotten or never saw it.
Right. Yeah, that's important. I perform a two-man comedy sword fight show called, we're known as the Duelists, and we perform at various Renaissance festivals around the country. Started out doing Horse Tourney, did a couple of other things for a few years, and then eventually recognized, since there was seemed to be a dearth of sword shows, I could do this. It was something I was really passionate about. And so I began doing it through California and then went to the rest of the country. So that's what we do. The audience comes in, sits down, watches the show, has a laugh. We pass the hat. The heckling thing, there's, I guess, two elements to it. One, it's an extension of me, meaning that if you know me, I can be really sarcastic and a real smartass at times, most of the time. The nature of our show, we present ourselves as these tough guy badasses who then trip, drop the sword, can't keep our stuff together. It's the comedy. Rather than looking like the fool right off the bat, we do a little role reversal where we look like a real serious tough guys, and then it turns out we're clowns, and that's where all the comedy is.
You kind of come out like Errol Flynn, that kind of thing.
It's hard for me to really answer that, except to say that when you think of your traditional comedy routines, especially back to the 40s and 50s, the Laurel and Hardys, and you always have your straight man and your foil. Well, we kind of did a Bill and Ted switch on this, meaning that at times one of us is the straight man and one's the foil, and then at times it flips. But the image we put out to begin with is real serious sword fighting tough guys. And we talk like we're tough guys. But then very quickly through everything we do, we'll do this real fancy flourish with the sword as an introduction and then drop it. And then I got to scramble and pick it up. And there's comedy there. It's a twist on your traditional straight man and foil. And it adds an element of comedy that I think a lot of people don't see coming, but it makes it, I think, a better show. Along those lines, it's almost like the Don Rickles school of comedy for people who remember that, but not quite the same thing, where we do heckle, we do give people a hard time in a fun, we're both in this together kind of way, and people love it. Now, as far as the heckling goes, specifically, there are a couple of elements. Heckling is always going to be out there. Every stand-up comedian, every performer, you deal with heckling. My feeling is to be ready and prepared for it than be caught off guard, number one. And number two, because I did have so much experience with improv. In fact, one of the things I did at Pleasure Fair was I was part of the Lord Mayor's Players under Mark and Sherry Clifton, if I remember their names correctly. And the amount of improv exercises and training that we went through there was pretty impressive. And I learned and got, I think, pretty good at being able to think on the fly and move and do what we do and what have you. And I saw the strength in adding that to the show. So, as I say, we do invite the audience to heckle us, but then we warn them we'll heckle them back. And sometimes we get nothing. Sometimes we get an amazing amount of heckles. And of course, we fire back, we come back with stuff. Usually it's all improv. We do have a few things lined up just in case. Rarely does it go so hard and so fast that it just gets to the point where people are done, because we try to keep it moving very quickly, get right back to where we need to be in order to build up to the climax and what have you. So it's an element, because of my background and my own personality, that is a strength. And so we've been able to use that, and it works for us, and it's a lot of fun, and people have a blast with it. And
Can
people
you,
come back show after show because they're like, wow, you never know what's going to happen. We want to see what's going to happen.
can you give me an example of a friendly heckle that you suggest to the audience that is a team building heckle?
Let me say, first of all, that when we heckle, you got to understand nothing is personal, nothing is about someone's appearance. So, for example, if someone heckles me, you may list the hair, and we make a lot of 80s jokes, 80s hair jokes, hair bands in the show. So if someone says something like, hey, the 80s couple, they want their hair back, depending on what they look like, and usually it's a long-haired guy, I'll say, hey, Metallica, get back to the 90s, or you first, or something that reflects what they did or what they said. Although it may seem dry in these moments that we're discussing it, when you fire back at someone and you use something about them, if it's a bald guy, I'll say, and he says something like, hey, his hair, I'm like, hey, buddy, at least I have hair. It's funny. It's not taken as a personal attack. That's the word, personal attack. Nothing we do is a personal attack.
What I'd like to do is give you an insult that a lot of performers use at the Renaissance Fair, and you can critique it and tell me if you would ever use a line like this. But somebody says something, you turn to them in the audience and you say, is that your face or did your throat throw up?
I have heard it. I wouldn't say it for three reasons. Number one, I don't think it's very good. Number two,
Agreed.
it doesn't seem to have any humor or comedy or fun in it. It just seems to be firing back at somebody as a direct personal attack rather than it being fun. And then the third reason is I freaking hate doing the same thing that everybody else does. And we get plagiarized all the time. And when I see that, I will take things out of the show or modify what we do because I just don't like doing what other people do. I don't want there to be any confusion.
It also doesn't have like anywhere you can go with it. What it is, and the people who use it, I think, are going for the shock of just insulting somebody. They don't want humor. They just want somebody to go gasp and laugh in embarrassment.
You know what? I don't know that I agree. I may well be wrong. What my experience tells me is that there's a lot more nuance when you respond to someone and what you say. And there's a whole nother foundation that we haven't really discussed yet about that. I think most people just aren't aware of the differences. Either they don't have enough experience or enough knowledge to really understand the differences, number one. And number two, I think that they don't like being heckled and they want to shut them down. Rather than it being fun and a game, they're just trying to stop it where it is. We've shared stages with acts who, when we talk backstage, they always get frustrated because they don't like hecklers. But if people in our audience stay for their show, then those people will bring that to their show and it throws them. They're not happy with it, which I understand. That's not how they do things. And they try to shut them down rather than encourage it.
I think that's very true. They have their thing they want to do, and they're on a track, and anything that gets on the track is just bad.
Right. There's another element in terms of a performer's personality. When a performer gets on stage, if you are a fun, open, pleasant person, then what you give off is going to be fun, pleasant, and enjoyable. If, however, you've got attitude, you're unhappy, you're bitter, you're just not a pleasant person, and you try to pass off heckles as fun, they don't come across as fun. they come across as mean, insulting, and cutting. There was a performer quite a few years ago, I don't believe he's around anymore, that used to joke that, oh, I love heckles and I always heckle. There were never heckles. It was just mean, bitter, and insulting. And he was actually pulled off stage once because he went back and forth with a guest in the audience. The entertainment director pulled him off stage. That was it for him at that event. And I don't think he lasted much longer. And much later, he came back and acknowledged that he was just not in a good place in his life. And that all came out on stage. So if you're someone who is pleasant and fun, when we invite the audience, we'll get a bunch of 5, 6, 8 people together that they basically look like a D&D party. And so I'll make a joke about it. Oh, look, you got the ranger and you got the barbarian and you got the dude with his gym headband thing, and everybody laughs. It's funny. And they're all like, yeah, you got it. That's us. It's not said in any mean spirit. It's said to and include them. And that is exactly how it is received.
I'm going to switch gears here a bit.
Sure.
Who have been your partners and co-writers? Like, who was your initial partner when you did The Duelist?
The first guy that I started performing with was Dave Baker, who is now one of the hosts on Forged in Fire. Now, this was back in the mid to late 90s, and we worked together for a few years. And then eventually, when I decided I wanted to go national, he really didn't want to leave LA or California and pursue more of the film work and props and that sort of thing. We went our separate ways. I had been working with another gentleman shortly after that who actually I met at Medieval Times, and we were friends for a long time. And then eventually, Michael, the gentleman I have now, we met through a mutual sword friend, and we got to know each other, and he was wanting something in this direction, and we talked and we met up, and we got together, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. And we've been doing the show together ever since. Not only do I do the two-man show, I've also done shows where I've had as many as 6 people. I brought 6 people to Singapore to do a show. We did a national educational touring show that had 3 people. Stage combat in all its mediums is where I've chosen to make a career. So whether it's music videos or these live shows or this big international show in Singapore that we did, whatever the show is, I will do that. And there's people I know that I can pull from, some that I work with over and over. Michael and I, the guy I'm working with now, we've been doing all this stuff in various formats, like I say, for about at least 15 years.
Speaking of the two-man show,
Yes.
does it evolve over time, or is it pretty much been set in concrete?
Oh, no. No, it evolves. The one show, the original show, I get bored with it. We're always adding. We do make a lot of pop culture references, a lot of political references. When something happened with Trump, we threw Trump in there. And there was a big fire on one of the bridges. Pittsburgh at all. It's a city of bridges. Anyway, big fire. The whole thing was shut down. It was news everywhere. So in the show, we made a joke about, my partner said something, and I'm like, yeah, that went over like having a barbecue on the Liberty Bridge. That was something very topical that would never work anywhere but Pittsburgh, but we threw it in for the Pittsburgh audience. We do that everywhere we go, both topical, local, relevant things, as well as pop culture events nationally and whatever is political going on. We'd like to throw that in there as well. And again, it's all in fun. We'll say something that heckles the Republicans, and then the follow-up will be to heckle the Democrats. So it totally changes. We're always looking for ways to edit it and make it flow smoother, jokes that maybe worked way back when, or pop culture references that are no longer relevant or really are old, we'll get rid of that. For a while, we were doing the Catch Me Outside bit from the girl on that Dr. Phil show. It's been so long, we moved on past that. And there's any number of those. I mean, it heavily changes over the years.
I'm sorry, I don't know if I caught Michael's last name.
Michael Moody.
Michael Moody. Thank you. Shifting gears once again, talk to me about what you're trying to do with your costumes.
Okay. Remember how years back, the Spanish court at the Queen show at Pleasure Fair, they all wore black and they all had this very heavy, serious vibe. In a way, we're going for a very theatrical, serious, heavy look with the thigh-high boots, the leather doublets, everything we wear, not everything, but the pants, the doublets are mostly black with, trimmed in other colors. I wear a white shirt. My partner likes black shirts, so he wears black. Our rapier carriers are black leather. When you look at us, it's this big, serious, heavy look because it adds to that theatrical impressiveness rather than just, oh, I'll just wear a light colored thin cloth jerkin and just a fair shirt, and that it doesn't stand out, it doesn't speak to anything. But wearing what we wear is very distinctive. It's all leather. Well, maybe not the pants, obviously they're wool, but the doublets, the gloves, the boots, all this leather and all this black definitely makes an impact. And except for the ruff and the cape, we're wearing things that would be completely acceptable for costume guidelines for the nobles at pleasure fair. It was always our goal. We wanted top quality with what we do, not just the writing and the acting, but the fight choreography and the costumes. Quality is what matters. So we wanted something that looked really good, really stood out, and yet was also very period. And I'm very pleased with it. Now, we don't wear a ruff, and we do make a couple of concessions here or there for because we're moving around and we're fighting on stage and we're doing what we do. But I'll tell you what's interesting. A couple of years ago at one of the shows, the entertainment director said, we're going to be upping our costume standards. Now, before I go on, let me say that the standards that we have or had, I haven't been involved with Pleasure Fair for 20 years. When I was there, the standards we had were top notch. And the rest of the country, they didn't have any costume guidelines. They didn't have a costume. Liz was the costume. I don't recall her title. You don't have that at any of the other festivals in the country. So we wanted something that would stand out. A couple of years ago, in conversation with the entertainment director, she said, hey, we're letting you guys know that in the next year or two, as people start adding to their costumes, this, that, and the other, we're going to be upping the standards. We want to be a little more period, a little more historic, and just better costumes. I'm thinking like, so what do we have to do? She's like, you? Oh, no, not you guys. If everybody had costumes half as good as yours, we'd be stoked. And I kind of laughed because finally, at least there's some recognition that all that time and effort and money that we put into these things was recognized. So yeah, the whole costuming and the color and the leather is to give us that very distinctive gravitas to make us really stand out, which adds that whole comedic bit when we end up tripping, being like Bill and Ted, don't have our stuff together.
Do you use microphones or head
We
mics?
do. And that's kind of an interesting compromise. It was kind of a shocker to me having come from California and then going to, say, the King Richard's Fair in Massachusetts or Michigan, where the standards were very different. And I was resistant at first, but I also realized before long that there's no way to compete against this. So I just jumped on board. Now, 30 years later, I'm really glad because it would be a bear to try to actually project in a way that I wouldn't kill myself. We use lavaliers. It's a very small mic on our lapel and it works. That's one of the compromises you just sort of make.
I have another sort of fair related question. Fair shows pull up a member of the audience and sort of make them part of the show. Have you ever done that?
No, we very deliberately didn't do that from day one because everybody else did it, and I didn't want to do what everybody else did. We do, however, go into the audience a couple of times. Even when I die, it's one of our shows is the manly art of the duel, and it's all the cliches and sword fighting, and the end one is the big death scene. When I die, I literally go and die on somebody. Funny as hell. If we get kids sometimes, I'll be like, oh, that's it. And I'll walk down there. There have literally been times where I am chasing a kid around the audience. And it's, again, funny as hell to see this big guy all in black running after a little 10-year-old kid that's booking his way out. And years ago, I caught the kid and it was just the best show ever. Now, I can't go 10 feet and the kid's gone. I'm 57 now. I'm a bit older. And I just can't do what I used to do. So I'll start to run after him for the comedy. But after a few steps, I'm like, all right, I'm too old for this, kid. You win.
Do you hold
Um,
your sides and sort of do a mock? Okay, kid, you got it. Yeah.
Totally, totally. I milk it and make it as big and as grand as I can. Everything is amped up times 10, and it just makes it that much funnier. So we do, in fact, go into the audience and deal with them directly multiple times in the show, actually.
When you're about to do your death scene and you're looking out at the audience, what's going through your mind when you're selecting the lap to die on?
You learn to recognize who's willing to play, who's not, who's going to be trouble, who's not, who wants it, who doesn't. And I will find, and I'm kind of keeping my eyes open throughout the show, I will find the person that I think will not only be receptive to it, but will go along with it and will make it the funniest bit. I can't even tell you the last time that didn't work out. You definitely avoid teenagers because they've got an attitude no matter what you do. But, you know, the adults or the little kids, especially a kid that heckled us and wouldn't shut up. When we go down to die on him, and what's funny is in our show, we run through all these cliches. Then we do our hat line, and then we say, now we'll bring all 10 steps together. So when we go to the very end of it, they know it's coming. So what's hilarious is when a kid is giving us a hard time and I start making my way into the audience and the kid he knows it's coming. So the kid gets up to try to get away from it. The parents will grab the kid and make the kid sit there when I die on the kid. So it's funny to go on a kid. It's funny to go on these really big buff guys or these big guys. I'll die on them, and my partner goes to say something, and I'll interrupt him with like, "Oh, this guy's got some nice muscles," or I mean, that's not what I say. And so there's always a way to play with them in a way that is fun and includes them in a good way. And the interactivity, that's an element not only in our show, but in our educational shows that we do and our historical shows that we do. We try to make it as absolutely interactive and engaging as is possible.
Do you do the vaudeville boo the bad guy, cheer the good guy when they make an entrance?
No, we have done a bit where my partner, when we come out from backstage, he'll come out and they'll cheer, and then he'll go, "Oh, that was lame." And then he'll do it again and they'll cheer more. And he's like, "Oh, come on, you can do better than that." And he'll get ready to come out a third time, only I will come out. And then he's like, "Oh, that's not fair. I'm the one who did all the work." Da, da, da. But that's as far as it goes. We very deliberately do not do the good guy and the bad guy or the straight man and the foil. It's very much we each get our, like Bill and Ted. There's times when I know what I'm doing and get it right. And there's times when I screw up, and there's times when he gets it right. And of course, it's in opposite. So when he gets it right, I'm screwing up, and vice versa.
You mentioned in
Sure.
brief something was the hat line. What is the hat line?
What I mean is, we do the show, which builds up to a climax. Everything we've done is comedy and fun and flowing and moving upwards. But then we stop so that we can pass the hat. We let them know. And then we say, now we'll bring all 10 steps together. And so then we kind of do the big climax in one last fight so that we're not doing this whole show that suddenly ends and we're like, okay, now give us money. We're giving them a whole show and we're taking an appropriate moment to mention the hat because that is inherently part of it in almost every festival in the country. But then it finishes with the big climax, which is all this fighting and comedy and back and forth and interactivity with the audience. And the hat line is just right in there in the middle.
Here's a variation of the hat line that's pretty popular that I'd like to run by you to get your reaction. And it's the line that goes something like this. You've been entertained, we've entertained you, and so we figure you probably owe us something, and then you do the hat.
Absolutely not. For again, the same reasons I said before, we don't want to do what everybody else does. But another really strong element is that we don't even want to go there. We acknowledge them and we thank them for coming to our show because they could go anywhere. We make it about them in a good way. And in no way do we joke about that, or we don't even mention denominations, which I know a lot of people do. And they make jokes. If you have any complaints, write it on the back of a 20. And we don't do that at all. We're mostly serious with our hat line. It's very heartfelt. It's very real. There's a couple of very brief throwaway jokes in there. They're throwaways. It's not the hat line. And by being so gracious and thanking them, we're kind of putting a flip on how people do it. It works really well for us because it's sincere and it's what we feel. I've seen acts get pissed off when they don't make enough in the hat. Nobody owes you. You earn it. If they want to give it to you, they'll give it to you. They'll appreciate it. If they really like you, they'll buy your merchandise. But they don't owe you. They don't owe us. If they don't want to put money in the hat, that is perfectly fine too. We have no beef with that. A lot of my feelings are that is because I remember when I was younger and I had no money, and either I was guilt or I didn't think the show was that good. And I was either guilted or felt pressured to respond in a way that the performer did, which I thought was completely uncool. I can't tell you how many times people have said, thank you for not guilting us, because most other acts do that. And I think it goes back to what I said before, which is that there's nuance there. And the audience definitely recognizes the difference. And we have been approached and they have thanked us for not being that way.
You've mentioned pacing a couple of times. What did you learn doing Renaissance fairs about how to pace a show?
Good question. I think it would be fair to say that I learned about pacing on the job. In other words, doing the show. When we started doing it, it was 45 or 50 minutes. And we realized before long it needs to be a little shorter. And you can kind of feel when things are dragging or not or moving. And it's by watching other shows, watching a lot of television, watching the old 40s and 50s comedians, and mostly just doing it, watching videos, although I hate watching videos of myself. I don't like it at all. It's just on the job training, and you learn what where it's slow, where it needs to be picked up, and then you edit, 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 edit. Those are just the greatest words anyone could ever learn. And then once the ball's rolling, once we've been doing it for 10 or 12 or 15 years, you kind of know when you're on and when you're not. And those times that we would see the audience is not quite responding anymore, we'd realize, okay, times have changed, or we're not delivering it the same way, or something's happening that's got to go. So it is a constant ongoing process of analyzing, looking at the show, and then editing it down so it does flow and it does move. I guess a lot of this you just learn by being experienced, because new performers, I tend to see those same mistakes and those same elements that you just do because you're new, and eventually they'll go through the process and figure it out for themselves.
I was actually more referring to the physical environment of the fair. The parades, the ale stands, the everybody hawking, and you having to figure out how to draw focus to yourself.
I'll tell you what I learned early on that kind of surprised me is that at festivals in the rest of the country, the customers kind of make a beeline to the stages to see the acts they want to see. And so it was never, of course, you're out there on stage or near your stage hawking. We have a whip in the show, so we crack the whip. That noise would certainly draw attention. But for the most part, people would come over, and it was less. That was one of the least difficult things I found, drawing a crowd to us, than any of the other elements. So that was never an uphill battle for us. And we still do it. I mean, our first 10 minutes of show, not in our showtime, is all part of just building a crowd.
I think it helps you have swords. I mean, you have something big and it makes noise.
Swords are definitely an easier appeal to than a few other props you may have.
When you talk about common mistakes you see beginners make,
Right.
what are those?
One is pacing and timing. You have to learn to set up, punchline, set up, punchline. You can't spend 30 seconds on a setup to a punchline that in those 30 seconds, you're just rambling. You're going to lose them. You start to lose them. The other element is that no matter how funny you think something is, if the audience doesn't think it's funny, then effectively speaking, it's not funny. And I see people keep or do things or insisting on doing what they want to do because they like it. But really, if your audience isn't getting anything out of it, then it's not doing you any good. And then the other thing, like I said, is edit. So much can be edited down so simply in order to make the flow better. I realized early on that even if you take out a bunch of really good jokes or really good fight choreography that you really like, but the overall show is now better because it's tighter, that's a better end product. The purpose of the choreography, the purpose of those jokes is to serve the whole show, the whole end product. And if they're detracting from it, taking longer, then you're not doing the show a service.
The way I phrase it when I do some workshops, is saying, if you're the loudest person laughing at your joke, that's probably not a good sign.
Well, there's an underlying, although there are some really, really freaking good acts on the circuit, one of the interesting things is that a lot of acts on the circuit don't have any training. It's really trial by fire because they enjoy Faire. They're doing something kind of funny. They're on the street interacting, and then the ED says, "Hey, you guys want to get on stage?" And they sort of work their way onto a stage show. But outside of Renaissance festivals, they don't have, this is not a moral judgment. It's not a good or bad. It's an observation of the amount or degree of technical understanding of some of these elements. A lot of these people don't have that greater someone who has gone through and performed at Second City, for example, will have a lot more knowledge and experience and can deliver better than someone who hasn't. And so a lot of these performers don't have that experience. And so it's a longer path to figure out what works and what doesn't. Years ago, someone I know said, "Hey, there's a friend of mine who wants to start performing. He isn't sure where to go. Can I have him talk to you?" I said, "Sure." This is 20 years ago. He came out and he talked to me. And I said, "Really, what you need to do, you can learn everything you can read, but you really just need to get on stage and start doing it. And that doing will give you the knowledge and experience. It'll fill in all those gaps for what you don't have. But that other technical knowledge will absolutely steer you and guide you in the right direction." And that's exactly what he did. And he is a really good performer now. He's a knife thrower, the Knife Throwers Hall of Fame. So in a way, it's a double-edged sword. You know, most performers don't have any other technical experience besides Renaissance festivals, which means it takes longer to figure things out. On the other hand, you also can't get the experience of doing it until you're out there doing it. You know, which is why a lot of the acts start at some small local fairs. They hone their skills, they hone their show, and then they move on to other bigger and better shows.
When you were kind enough to say yes to the interview, was there something in your brain that said, be sure to mention so and so? So this is your be sure to mention so and so moment.
For what it's worth, on a broader scope, most of what I've learned to do is by watching other people and learning what not to do. There's a ton of people through the years at Pleasure Faire. We're going back to the late 80s and early 90s that I learned so much from, also medieval times. But there wasn't any one person that really sort of helped me out. I didn't have any kind of mentor relationship, which I've discovered is quite common on the circuit. There seems to be a nice little track of people that all move up the hierarchy into a previously vacated position. But I don't know. I've just always been very independent, so I don't have the benefit of anything like that. You know, I also left home at 17 and put myself through school and put myself through the world. So I've always been very, very independent.
Do you remember the moment when you decided to make this full time? Was it like a really great show where you came off stage and go, I can do this?
I
So,
do.
oh, tell me.
I do. I was contacted by a company in Singapore looking for a show, and they liked what I had, and they wanted to hire two people. And I said, "Great, we can do that." And then, I don't know, a week later, they said, "Do you think we can make it four people?" And I said, "Sure, we can." And then a week later, they said, "Do you think we can make it 6 people?" And I said, "Absolutely." I rewrote, revamped. We ended up going to Singapore, and we were treated like A-list celebrities. We had our own green room. We were put up in 4 and 5 star hotels. We were treated really, really well. But it wasn't like we were being treated like, oh, celebrities. No, we were respected for what we did in a way that I had never experienced in the States. You go to Ren Fair and a lot of it's like, hey, you're just lucky we're even hiring. I know I started out at $5 honoraria with Pleasure Fair. Eventually, like I say, after however many years, I made it to like $25. Was also doing 17 things per day. The fact that we were appreciated and respected really made an impact. And when I got back, I think we opened up a show like a week later, and in the preparation for it, it was like going from the highest high to the lowest low as far as how we were being talked to and treated. And I was like, fuck this. I do not want to do that. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to do the show. I'm going to do it on my terms. I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. And that was it. I hit the ground running like you wouldn't believe, and busted my ass. And here I am so many years later. Some things worked really well, some things didn't. Kept my foot in Hollywood a little bit, got hired originally for Deadliest Warrior, but I do things on my terms. And it goes back to Singapore and how I was treated. Having come out of medieval times was the last time that I remember thinking to myself, I will never let anybody intimidate me again the way that those guys did or tried to do. And so then having that positive experience in Singapore just really changed everything for me. And that's what I've done. I mean, I'm a very direct, open, and generous person. I'll work with a festival, but in terms of a contract, we lay it all out and we do what we say we're going to do. But there's a lot of things that we're not going to do or we're not going to tolerate. And we work a little less than we otherwise might, but we're also not disrespected like we otherwise might be.
Medieval times sounds like a very top-down. Everything was intensely choreographed and you did their Wary the Highway, that kind of thing. What I liked about the fair, it was a very bottom-down driven organization. And if you had an idea, you could just do it. And it seems to me that there's 2 ways you can organize a fair or a Disneyland kind of thing. You can either do the top-down thing where everything is intensely choreographed, or you can do the bottom-up thing where you kind of say, go out and have fun within these parameters. That's what I credit the fair with for me in giving me that freedom to exist in an organization. Doesn't have a lot of rules on how to do things. There's not like a script I have to do. What the fair gave us was that confidence to exist in this actual situation, but then feel free enough to interpret the rules and accomplish the goals of the whatever the organization is. And that's a long-winded question, but now you can talk.
That's a really good point. And to be perfectly honest, I never thought of it that way, top down versus bottom up. But as you're explaining this and I'm reflecting back, when I was with the Lord Mayor's Players and we did a play and whatever, of all things, there was a play that we did which was loosely based on song by the band Rush. And I was a big Rush fan, and somehow that came up and I mentioned it. And they're like, you know what? We can totally turn this into a play for the show, which we did. I don't remember much about it. And then when I think of some of these shows we do now and I see the cast, which we have really very little interaction with, I see the same thing where they all kind of develop their own character and they develop their own bits and they get approval.
Thank you. I'm kind of running out of words, so let's end with a few role plays. Say it's Thanksgiving, you're at the family meal, and suddenly niece Zoe, maybe she's 15 years old, suddenly pipes up that she's going to do the Renaissance Fair this spring because of all the fun that Uncle Randall always talks about having at the Renaissance Fair. Your sister looks at you says, tell me, Randall, about the wonderful things my daughter will learn at the Renaissance Fair. And you say,
If I'm talking to my sister, I would say let her do it. Let her experience this. Let her pursue her passions. If it's something she ultimately does want to pursue and do, this is a great training ground. If she realizes this isn't a career path for her, this is a good, safe place to learn that. This is where her passion is. Let her pursue it. The thing that I am so tired of hearing of, that I was so tired of hearing 15 and 20, and now at 57, I'm still tired of hearing is no, is hearing excuses for why things can't be done rather than figuring out ways they can be done. And if she wants to go out, absolutely. And whatever fears or concerns she has, I'm like, if you've got fears and concerns, you should have them in the rest of the world and not the Renaissance Fair, because that is, aside from safety, it's one of the safest places. It is a great training ground. It is a great place to meet people. People who are either socially awkward or introverted can find a home there. It is a great introduction to the larger performance world. Absolutely. Did that answer the question or assuage her concerns?
your sister looks relieved, and your Zoe is beaming with, yay, Uncle Randall. You came through for her. So good job. So I'm going to stop talking and I'll hit the stop recording button. Anything else you'd like to add?
Not that I can think of, but if in a way, this is, I mean, I have a career, I own a house, I pay my bills, I whatever colloquial things I want to say, all on performing with a skill that I developed that started at the pleasure fair.
Do you have any current plans or future plans to introduce to the fair world?
I got a whole new program that I put together that I am trying to get out to the Renaissance festivals that is a hands-on instructional lesson. I will send you, when we hang up, I'll send you a couple of photos from the last show that we did so you can see, you kind of get a visual on all the kids that come out for this.
That was my 2023 interview with Randall Scott. Questions or comments for Randall? You can forward them to me at djng@earthlink.net. Questions or comments about the podcast itself can be directed to me at djng@earthlink.net. Finally, if somebody you know or you would like to be a guest on Fair Folk at Work, contact me at djng@earthlink.net. But that's it for this time. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.